You're about to watch a lecture hosted by ISU GDC. Have fun!
Just before we begin, I wanted to introduce James Portnow and ourselves as a club. Hi everybody, I'm Zachary Kane. I'm the president of the Game Development Club here on campus. We're the ones who organized this, but we couldn't do it without the help from our friends in the computer science department, the software engineering department, the electrical and computer engineering department, as well as the Department of Psychology. But really, we couldn't have put this all together without the Committee on Lectures themselves. The Committee on Lectures is funded by the government and student body, and they sponsor more than 100 events annually. Copies of their schedule and events can be found at the entryway. Definitely go make sure to check those out. But since you're not here to hear me talk about, who paid to get him here, we might as well actually start talking about James Portnow. James Portnow is the lead writer of a YouTube series called Extra Credits. Many of you guys may know about it. It's a fairly popular show, but they focus almost entirely on video games and game design and all the abstract things you guys may have never thought about. And if any of you guys are interested in that kind of stuff, we may be the club for you. But without any further ado, here's James Portnow.
Hello, everybody. Can you all hear me in the back? Awesome. Great. Thank you guys for having me out here. As he said, I'm James Portnow. I am a game designer by trade. I have worked on games ranging from the Call of Duty series, Farmville, stuff by Square Enix to things for Riot. In my spare time, when I can, I teach, and I write a show called Extra Credits. And today, I wanted to come here and talk to you guys about something that's been on my mind a great deal. Because, as many of you may know, I've been working to get larger acceptance of games, and especially, been doing a lot in politics. And a few months back, I was talking to one of the senior advisors to the president, and he said to me, why should I care about games? Why should someone like the president of the United States care about video games? And this caused me to think, because for all of us here, we've all had meaningful experiences with games. We all know that this is more than a pastime. It's not just a way to kill the hours between work and sleep. We all know that there's a reason that this is the fastest growing mass medium in the history of humanity. That in 20 years, we have eclipsed the box office, we're overtaking television and music. There's a reason that people spend so many hours of their lives on games. And so I started trying to figure out, okay, what is that reason? What is the magic of games? And I thought on it, and I tried to deconstruct it. I tried to talk about it logically, like I do in Extra Credits. I tried to break it down to some sequential series of answers, and I couldn't do it. And so then I asked myself, okay, what brings me to this moment right now? What brings me here on this stage? What is it that caused me to dedicate this one life I have to games? And what is it that brings all of you here on a night where I'm sure many of you have homework, you have plenty of other things you could be doing, and yet you're here, sitting just to hear someone talk about why games matter? What is it that brings so many of you to perhaps follow the same path that I did and hope to dedicate so much more of your life and your time to these things that at times have seemed trivial? And as I was trying to work out this problem, you'll have to forgive me, because I had to go back and back and back to why I got into games in the first place. And so you'll forgive me as I take a short trip down memory lane. But when I first realized why this mattered, I was probably 5 years old, and I was driving south through Seattle with my mother. And we were heading to the Kingdom, this old stadium that doesn't even exist anymore. And Seattle's this great town for games, right? It has PopCap and Valve and Microsoft and Nintendo America. But this was early. And we drive into this parking lot right next to the Kingdom, this big, boxy, warehouse-looking building. I get out, and I walk up to these two sliding glass doors, and I will never forget this moment, because they open up in front of me, and I'm just hit with this cacophony of MIDI, and it's Nintendo of America's World's Fair. And my mother had given me a Nintendo for the Christmas before, and knew I enjoyed them, and thought it'd be a lark. She saw it in the newspaper, and thought it'd be a good way to spend the day, right? And so here I am, at the Nintendo of America's World's Fair, running from station to station to station. My mom keeps going, do you want to try any of these games? I'm like, no, I got to see them all, because it was games I'd never seen before. And so as I run from station to station, I finally get close to the back of the hall, and there's this banner hanging up that just, something about it speaks to my 5-year-old self. And I get into this line. At the time, I think everybody's adults. They were probably 13. But I'm the only 5-year-old there. And we were terrible at conventions at the time. We would just set up 2 Nintendos and let people play for as long as they wanted. So the line's an hour long, and my mom keeps asking me, are you sure you want to try this one? It seems like it's taken a real long time. But I just keep looking up at that banner. And it's got this city inside a crystal ball with a sword and an axe crossed behind it. And something about that city just spoke to my 5-year-old self. And, I mean, you all know what game this is. And I finally get up and get my hands on that piece of gray plastic, and I choose my characters, and it probably takes me an hour to beat Garland, right? The first boss. And I'm really excited because I beat the boss, and I've saved the princess. And I've played video games before. I know what you do in video games. You rescue princesses. So I've beaten the game. And so here I am, and I'm going to go back to the castle and see the end of the game, and man, that was great. That was different than any other games I played. And I get back to the castle, and they say to me, thank you for rescuing our princess. We'll fix this bridge for you now. Like, that's a weird way to end a game, but okay, I'll play along. And I get up to the bridge, and as soon as I step onto that bridge, we get this, right? And the music begins to swell, and the text starts to roll. And this may look like nothing to you right now, right? But at the time, this was beautiful. And my 5-year-old self is just in awe. And I understand my place in this world. It made me feel powerful. It made me feel good. But it wasn't that way. It's actually the next moment that brings me here today in front of all of you guys. Because right after this, after the screen fades to black, a world opens up in front of you. Imagine what that means to someone whose entire life was perhaps a few rooms in the backyard unsupervised, right? There's this world to explore and discover entirely for me to do whatever I want. And I realized that it's not just then, right? We've all had that moment so many times, because after a long day at work, after a hard day at school, when you feel trapped in your job or your major or some part of your life, well, that moment when you turn on the screen and get lost in that world. And then when you turn it off, you realize that this world's just like that one, right? It's here for you to make the choices that you want to make, that you aren't trapped, that you can do anything in the same way that you can there. And you walk away from it feeling a little bit better than when you sat down in front of that screen. And I mean, that's a powerful thing. That's part of what we mean when we talk about the magic of games. Because that's something that only this medium can provide. You can't get that with television, you can't get that with film. That's something that we can only get through the world of games. And since then I've had so many of these moments, right? It hasn't just been that day or that instance. Because since then, I've set foot on 10,000 worlds and seen 1,000 sunsets. I've lived history and I've walked on the streets of ancient cities. I have seen things I couldn't possibly imagine and experienced things I couldn't even dream of. And sometimes I just sat back and enjoyed the view. But for all that power, providing us a world, a space of our own, there's something more that games can do. is part of the magic of games is this ability to let us walk a mile in someone else's shoes, to just the slightest bit step into the life of someone else, a life we would otherwise never experience. And through doing so, come to compassion and understanding, sympathy and empathy. Or maybe sometimes just live a little bit of that life that we always wish we had. Or even just step into the role of the greatest people and ask ourselves their questions, face their challenges, struggle with their struggles, and through doing so, come to learn about ourselves, about the people around us, and the world we live in. Come to associate more with lives that are so far from our own that no other medium could bring us quite as close. Because no, it's not living that other life. But just that little bit, part of the magic of games, is letting us walk in the shoes of someone else and experience their struggles. But somewhere in chasing this, we lost some of the magic that comes with this. And somewhere in trying to be more like other media, trying to be more cinematic, more like film or television, somewhere in that, we forgot what it is that makes this medium so powerful, how it is that we deliver on the magic of games. Because for the first time in the history of humanity, we have a mass medium where the audience isn't merely audience, but participatory. You don't just sit back and listen to an author or director tell you their opinions. You don't just sit there and listen to me tell you my thoughts, right? In a game, you participate. You're part of the art. You make your own choices and your own decisions. In a game, you come to your own conclusions. And through doing so, learn something about yourself. That's a powerful thing. This is something that no other medium can provide. Nowhere else do we as a mass medium get to participate in the art. Nowhere else we get to make these decisions that inform our lives going forward. And when I talk about these things, when I talk about these decisions, it's not just these big moral choice moments. It's not just these moments where we have a good and evil bar. It's any moment where you take that controller and you set it down and you ask yourself, what did I just do? What did I do? In no other medium can you ask that question, what did I do? And it doesn't matter if it's about the remote horrors of modern war, or what it means to raise a gun to your shoulder and point it at another man. But it's not limited either. Because as we move forward, and hopefully as many of you will show us, it's also questions about what it means to get from one side of this life to the other, what it means to share it with somebody, how you make that choice. Any question that's part of the human experience, any question that we live through, is one of these things that we can explore in games, that we can, rather than be told about, discover our own thoughts for ourselves. Even if it's something as simple as the fact that we can never go back, right? And this is a magical thing. This is a powerful thing. To provide us with an environment that's totally safe, that's totally harmless to us, to make these decisions, to come to wrestle with these questions before we have to face them in the real world, before we have to face them in an environment where they'll determine the rest of our lives. Simply get practice going out and asking ourselves, was that right? And being able to do so, that to me, that is a key part of the magic of games. But there is at least one other thing that I want to talk to all of you about, which is this idea that through games, we can educate without teaching. How many of you guys recognize this? Just hands up. I got enough. All right, good. I just barely hear in the, as I mic scream on this. There we go. Oh, so good. All right, so this may seem like a silly thing. It's a magic card, but it only seems like a silly thing because we trivialize games all the time. This sounds ridiculous, but it changed my life, right? I don't know if you can read in the back what it says at the bottom of this card, but it says, there are some qualities, some incorporate things that have a double life which thus is made, a type of twin entity which springs from matter and light, evinced of solid and shade, head ground of silence. And when I read this, first time I read this, by 12, 13, Magic had just come out, and I was sitting there and I was playing with my friends. I remember laying this card on the table and reading that quote. And the language in it was so much more powerful than any of the hack fantasy or sci-fi I had read up to that point. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still love my hack fantasy and sci-fi. But you know what I did? I ran out to the library and got the book that was in. And then I got all the books that they quoted on those cards. Why? Not because someone sat me down or made me take a test, but because they were introduced to me in a context I loved, in a way that I was already excited about, that made them all the more magical. And so because Richard took those few extra moments to fill these cards with quotes, things from the real world, it ended up determining where I went to college. I actually have a master's in entertainment technology, but my undergrad was in classics, and I went to a school where you just read the great books from Homer to Einstein, because I wanted to read all these things. And to this day, the lifelong love of classics, which these cards instill in me, I use that more both in my life and my work life than I do that master's in entertainment. So that's this incredible thing, and we say all the time, right? We hear this counter argument that, oh, if we're going to make games educational, they can't be fun, they can't be engaging. But that is so patently false. We don't lose any of the engagement. In fact, these cards are more mystical, more incredible, because of a little bit of extra effort. And so, for me, that was this huge moment where games brought me in, got me excited about something that has stayed with me the rest of my life. But it's not limited by any means to that. How many of you guys recognize this? That is the line you cannot cross. So, how many of you guys recognize this? I know we got more engineers in here than that. All right, good. So anyway, this is the stack. This is sort of how memory management works in a computer. But the first time that someone had taught me about this, I was like, oh yeah, I got it, no problem. Because it's the same as the stack in Magic, right? It's last in, first out. And I had been working with this for 10 years. And I actually could think around these problems more than some of the guys who've been doing it professionally for a couple of years, because I've been doing it in my game. And in my game, I wanted to understand this concept inside and out, right? I wanted to think about all the ways I could use it, because it gave me what I wanted in my game. It gave me strength, it gave me ability within my game. We're not limited in what we teach. And as many of you know, I've been doing a lot of work with, especially public schools in America, but with everything from the universities to school boards to superintendents, talking about how we integrate games in our schools. Because schools should be something that every child wants to go to. And we can do that, right? Over the last century, we have spent more money than in all other centuries combined learning how to engage a human being. Between film, television, modern music, video games, we have spent so much time and devoted so many resources to figuring out what actually holds our interest. But we use that only on our leisure time. 150 years ago, best thing a kid had to do outside of school was hit a ball with a stick, and it was hard to get them to do their homework. Today we have YouTube and Facebook, we've got video games, we've got movies. Of course, school has at times a difficult time competing with that. But that's not the fault of YouTube. That's not the fault of movies or video games. They're the ones doing it right. We should take all those things that we've learned from building these other media and apply them to our schooling. Because our leisure time has gotten so much more exciting over the last century, but our schooling, barely so. And 150 years ago, when this school system was invented, it was invented in Prussia to bring an agrarian society into the industrial age. And it's fantastic for that. It's still actually really good for that. But that's not the problem anymore. What we're trying to solve today is how you bring an industrial society into the information age future. And today, in the palms of our hands, on our tablets and our cell phones, we have access to more raw data than all the aggregate libraries of the 19th century. And so today the problem isn't keeping data in your head, right? It isn't about memorizing the few facts or the multiplication tables. You're going to need to be a good clerk or factory worker because there's no library within 20 miles of a small village you're going back to. Today, the question is how do you take that massive, massive data you have access to and use it to solve the problems that come at you every day, problems you've never seen before. And that's exactly what we do in games every time we play. And the government did a study a couple of years back, asking a lot of major corporations, what do you need to have an effective workforce for the 21st century? And their answers that came back were collaboration, lateral thinking, communication, and creativity. I can't think of 4 things we practice more in games every day. But it doesn't matter what we talk about, right? There is no subject that we can't teach through games, right? I've seen kids learn high-level math through doing World of Warcraft. I've seen economics taught at Berkeley through StarCraft. I have seen kids lean in and get excited about history because of Moment in Civilization. I've even seen the most boring subjects, city planning, made engaging by what we do. So this is an incredible tool to educate without teaching. But for all the things we can teach, sometimes we miss the most important one. And this is a simple one, but it's something we so often forget about as we discuss education and as we discuss games and how they might work together. Years ago, I was working with a lower income school district. And it was a type of school district where you didn't go to college, where pregnancy just happened, where I had a kid who said to me that he couldn't do his homework because he was hiding in the bathtub because people were shooting outside the previous day. And so I brought in Mario Brothers, thinking to sort of teach them about the scientific method, actually. I brought in Mario Brothers, and this kid sits down, starts to play. And I watch him. I watch him run and jump and fall in a pit. And he runs and he jumps and he falls in the pit. And then he runs and he jumps. He tries something different. And he gets to the other side. And he didn't kick the door wide open, but it began this conversation about the fact that that was his life. Right? There was a way to get to the other side of that pit. There was some set of choices that would get him where he wanted to go. It may be difficult. It may be much, much harder than everything else he could do, but there was some choice. And that may seem like an obvious thing to us, right? And intellectually it really is, this idea that we have agency, that we have control over our own lives, that our choices matter. But there are a lot of people out there who are confronted with a life that is of such a nature that they're forced mostly to think about the present, right? And to never see that possibility. And yet here in this game, this child could see, because time was so compressed, he easily see his choices and the consequences they had. And as such, we were able to talk about how that's him. That's him. And his choices now will determine where he gets in the future. And that's a powerful thing, right? What is schooling for? Schooling is to inculcate a lifelong level of learning. But it's also to leave you, when you get out, with the tools and the skills you need to choose the life you want, to have agency over your own life. That's the job of school. And that's something you train in games every day. This is something that we can use to work together between schools and games to provide that to every child. But before I open this up to questions, there is one last point, which is, I say this a lot to my colleagues, and sometimes they will look at me and go, "Oh, that sounds great. That sounds fantastic, James. I really love the idea. But that's insane. I have a bottom line I got to hit. I work for a major corporation. We can't put these things into our games. But you know what's insane? Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result, right? We have seen major publishers crash. We have seen long-standing studios fall apart. We've even seen the Great New Hope, the company that so many game companies pivoted to model themselves after, lose hundreds of millions of dollars, quarter after quarter after quarter. So finally, we have to acknowledge that our audience has changed. Our audience is not as immature as it once was. And so we have to stop trying to treat them that way. We have to stop saying things like, your mom's going to hate it, or appealing to the basest aspects of our nature, or pandering. And many of you know this ad campaign. I hear a couple of you groan. Those of you groaning probably know that I can't show the rest of this ad campaign. But, right, this is terrible. But what's amazing is that even these guys ended up learning the lesson. There's nothing to build off something like this. Yeah, you may get a few more clicks in the short term, but it's not going to put people in the state you need them in to really be excited about this game, to actually tell the stories that we all tell about the games we love. It's not going to leave you with anything to build a franchise off of. It's not going to give you anything to build a series which will grow. And so that's what their ads look like today. Because even they realize this. And so in a world where a game that looks like this vastly outsells a game that looks like this, we've got to ask ourselves, what's in the magic that we found here that we might have lost a bit while trying to fit a few more polygons onto the screen here? And so to me, when I ask myself this question, what is the magic of games? It was this ability to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, to experience a life that I would never experience, and through doing so, come to a little bit of better understanding of the people around me, of humanity. And that's just such an incredible thing. But it's also this ability to make my own choices and make your own decisions within the space of possibility of a game, right? To come to your own conclusions, and through doing so, through wrestling with these questions, come to understand about yourself. That's such a powerful thing. And finally, it's this idea of educating without teaching. But that's my take on it, right? I'm not right. I encourage everybody here to go through this exercise for yourself, because there's a reason we're all here today, and it's my hope, and it is sincerely my hope that it's in 10 years I'm playing you guys' games, and that a lot of you fix a lot of the problems that my generation created. So with that, I would love to hear your thoughts, your ideas, your questions. You can ask me anything you want. It can be about video games, it can be about the lecture, it can be about extra credits, it can be about development. I will stick around for as long as I can to try and answer as many of these as possible. Feel free to line up at the mic and just start the conversation. Thank you. All right, so yeah, shoot. I'm gonna sit because I have paced long enough. Plus, I feel like for a lot of these things, I really don't want to be a guy on the stage talking at you. This should be a conversation. So yeah, what's your thought? Mike, I think the mic might be off. Oh yeah, maybe that'll work. Let's do that. That way I buzz less.
Probably on.
There we go.
On
awesome.
a scale of 1 to on. So this is something that I've been thinking about for quite a while now. Where do you think is the line between something being gimmicky or something being new and ingenuity and all that stuff? Because like with the Wiimote, when that first came out, like Wii Sports is like one of the top 5 best-selling games of all time. And you're like, oh, I'm bowling, it broke my TV, shit. And then you see like even Mario Kart because you can tilt it, but then we go on to other stereotypical Wii games that are painful to bring up. And then you compare that to the Kinect and the iToy and the PlayStation Move and other things like that, and even the touchpad on the PS4 controller that's really gimmicky and not a lot of people like it. So where is the line between, oh, that's a really cool idea, or, oh, God, no.
We can do it.
So the question was, what is the line between gimmicky and innovative? And the answer is in how you use it. Did you ever play Johann Sebastian Joust?
No.
Okay, so I'm getting back up because this is going to take a moment. I'm going to describe Johann Sebastian Joust. I'm excited. So Johann Sebastian Joust was the best game for the PlayStation Move that PlayStation would never release because it didn't use a screen. So how Johann Sebastian Joust worked is you could have as many people as you had moves, and basically you had your little move controller with this little light on the top, right? And music would play. And as the music played, how fast the music was determined how fast you could move before your light went out on your stick. And the last person with a lit stick wins the round, right? And so, of course, you get all sorts of tricky, like you played in a convention setting, some people would try and slap the other person's move, other people would try and just sort of vanish into the crowd, holding their move stick, and it was great, right? It was a blast. It was incredibly innovative use and positive, non-gimmicky use of the move. But then, in terms of AAA, for the most part, all we did was say, hey, let's take these other games that aren't built for this control scheme and slap them on top of this new control scheme because it's the hit thing. And that's when it becomes a gimmick, right? When you're not actually doing anything new with it at all. And so, to answer your question, I mean, the line between gimmick and innovation really is in how you use your novelty. Is that a fair enough answer?
Yeah,
Awesome.
totally. I was just having like Vietnam flashbacks to like the move, like with the bow and arrow, and how that didn't work at all. And like, Kinect Adventures. That was a good game.
The Kinect was a tragedy.
It wasn't a good game.
So for a while, I taught at the university level, and I had a student who had large hair. And the Kinect would always detect him as a very small person with his head here and his arms and legs here and here. So,
And then there was all the problems with the Kinect if you weren't a Caucasian person because it just didn't know that you were there.
How tempted one might be to say like Microsoft. But I will obviously not say that on camera. Well, thank you so much for your question.
Hello, I just saw your recent video about the, it's not recent, it's old, but about the PS Vita and how it kind of failed.
Yes.
It's a great console. I think anyone that has one knows it's awesome. But do you think there's a future for mobile gaming platforms that their primary purpose is gaming? Or do you think Nintendo's basically just living off their IP and they're going to have to move to like the App Store and the Google Play Store?
So both your answers are correct. I do wish there was I like having a handheld game system. I like having a handheld game system that can do a lot more than my tablet. And I like having a handheld game system that has an integrated controller so I don't only have touchscreens. I love touchscreen games, but truth is the one I'm most excited about right now is, have you seen the portable Steam unit? So there's a Steam box that's basically a tiny Steam box built into a controller. And this is really exciting for me because when you bring the ease of PC development and the ability to also reach the PC audience to a mobile platform, you now have a reason to develop for a non-iOS platform again, and you're going to get a lot more games that are playable on it that are incidentally playable because the developer was developing for PC, right? And it happened to make it Steam controller compatible. So if I see a future for mobile gaming, it really is in very open platforms like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
While I have been playing games both myself and watching my friends play them as a kid, it wasn't until very recently that I started sitting down and attempting to deconstruct them. And I say attempting because in some games I can tell for the most part what works in gameplay, but then I run into problems with games like Until Dawn where I can sit and tell you everything I loved about the game in the last third of it, and everything I hated up until then. Because as a small aside, in my opinion, it's a $60 glorified movie despite the choices you make. But my opinion was, well, my question was, to get into something like game design, how can someone who isn't very good at it sit down and start to deconstruct a game to find out what would work for their ideas in the future?
So I actually recommend that you start with tabletop games. I know that sounds really weird, but in a tabletop game, because you have the rule set all right there, you get to really see the translation between rules and experience, right? You can figure out, okay, they use these rules together to make these people competitive, right? Or to get these people to work together. And so you can start seeing some of that. And then you can move on to video games where a lot more of it's under the hood, right? Where a lot more of it's in a black box that you can't see. For example, let's say you're trying to deconstruct a first-person shooter. Those are really hard to deconstruct because there's so much going on in the physics system that there's literally no way for you to really reverse engineer, and you sort of just have to gut feel why they made certain choices. But yeah, that's where I would start. But otherwise, I mean, it's just practice, and it sounds like you're doing just fine. Don't worry about it at all. When you can, just find other people to have these discussions with, have that conversation, argue these things out. Because also the other thing is, there's not necessarily a right answer. I mean, in some cases there is, but for the most part, a lot of design decisions are guess and check, right? We make an educated decision the best that we possibly can, and then we test it in front of real people who have opinions that are different than ours, who have lives that are different than ours, and see how it works. And so you're doing the right thing. The only thing I would say past that is just look at some hobby games, some tabletop games.
I honestly never thought of that. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, take care.
Hi. So recently I've noticed that there's kind of been a growing discussion about how some indie game developers seem to take up the banner of we don't make games, we make art. And so, like, from what I've noticed at least, I've seen there's the camp that believes, I can see the camp that is like, oh, they're saying that it takes people from outside the industry to really innovate and create something new. But on the other side of it, I also see that some people take that as something like perhaps pretentious of them to say. So I was just wondering what your thoughts on that was.
Well, it's this challenge, right? There's a large discussion about whether or not we need rebranding, right? For a long time, comic books were comic books, no matter what you were doing. And then they became graphic novels, and people started studying them seriously. And now we have the graphic novel revolution. It's a huge industry, all this stuff. And so a lot of this is really a discussion about, is the word game synonymous with pastime for children, right? Have we trivialized as a society the word game? And if so, do we need to instead start talking about these things as just pieces of art like any other art? And I wish I had a solid conclusion on that. I still have to do a lot more thinking on myself.
Maybe an extra credits episode in the future?
Yes, at some point.
That's all I want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Hi, James. My name's Tim. I'm a student in the Graduate School of Education here on campus, and your work and the work that's being done on games-based learning and games in education is like fascinating and exciting for me. But I study student affairs, and so what I'm curious about is how do we take the research and the innovations that are being done in the sphere and apply some of that to spaces like a college campus where it's not quite a classroom. There are it's almost a bigger and more varied canvas.
Did you see, I'm going to blank on the name of the game. We had this problem earlier. I'm failing at proper nouns today. UCLA did a game for the film school that was a campus-wide game that introduced freshmen not only to each other, but to their classes, got them to meet with their advisors, all this sort of thing. So just look up the UCLA film school game, and God, I wish I could remember the name of it. And it will give you a really good blueprint, actually, for here's how you do a campus-wide game that promotes that makes campus life more positive, but is not necessarily tied to any one subject, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome, yeah, take care.
Take care.
Hello.
Hey.
Throughout your presentation, you've talked a lot about the power of games and how they can make things interesting and fun. And that's definitely true. Like, I recently discovered a game that made subway systems interesting.
Was it Mini Metro?
It was.
Thought so. It is. And oh my God, the art, like, it's so genius. It was just cool.
But I'm not here to talk about that. Like I think you kind of glanced over like the other side of the coin, which is games that make things unpleasant and sometimes deliberately painful for the player. And like I think those games are very useful for exploring about yourself in a lot of ways. Like, as much as I dislike the writing in Heavy Rain, I thought that at least in like The Father's Path, the gameplay was sometimes ingenious in making you feel his pain and his struggles. And in particular, there was a scene where you have to cut off your own finger. And it was just so amazingly well put together. And like, I think, yeah, it's just because it's a bad experience, just because it doesn't mean that it's not teaching.
And this is why I always try to refer to games as interesting or engaging rather than fun, because Schindler's List isn't fun, right? But it is engaging. It's a painful experience to watch through, but it is something that holds our interest all the way through. And I feel like games can do the exact same thing, right? We have to get past the concept of fun, but you were not at any point bored at that moment where you're freaking out about the fact you're going to cut off your own finger. And that's one of the things that games can do.
Well, I can think of one video game that did actually kind of centered itself around boredom in an interesting way. And you guys actually talked about it on your show, and that would be that one in Dubai.
Are you talking about
Spec Ops: The Line?
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
Because that game, the gameplay was very boring, but it was very deliberately boring, and I thought that enhanced the experience there.
Interesting. So, while the gameplay was very routine, I never found myself bored during the experience. Right? Like the Spec Ops is something that if you haven't seen Spec Ops: The Line, I won't talk too much about it here because I shouldn't spoil it. But Spec Ops: The Line is an incredible piece of using video games for something more, and using the medium and the form we've developed and all sort of the tropes we've developed to pull the rug out from under you and force realizations upon the player. And as such, I found it engaging all the way through, but
it was engaging, but not in a typical game way.
Right, but that's why I try and get outside the word fun, right? Like, in the same way that there are not just action movies, we decide that the engagement of game is like the engagement of action movies rather than the engagement of movies, if that makes sense. And we got to get past that thinking to the fact that no, there is no generic engagement for games. Games can engage in all the ways that we as human beings are engaged. Just like songs can make you can love a song that makes you feel just terribly, wretchedly sad and depressed, right? And yet it's still engaging. You never are like, and turn it off. It's never just background noise to you. And hopefully games can do the same thing. But I hope that answers at least some of your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, James. Thank you so much for speaking today. It's really sort of opened my brain a little bit. I was interested in hearing about the work that you've done for educational systems. And I'm wondering, in sort of like a utopian future, how you would envision games being integrated into sort of early education kind of curricula. Specifically, we've had the ideas of Super Mario Brothers teaching people about player agency, World of Warcraft teaching math. In this way, would you like to see games integrated to sort of like teach concepts in sort of abstract ways and then be accompanied by other educational materials, or would you rather have games that are developed specifically for the purpose of education? Because I know that I've played kind of math games in 4th and 5th grade that were not the most engaging.
So, I am not going to give this question the time it deserves because I have a whole other lecture I often give to sort of people running schools that goes on for an hour about exactly this. But there's a couple of things. So to answer your point about early education on games, one of the things that we have to consider, and I'm actually doing an extra credit around this really soon, is game literacy. You have this weird thing, you try and drop Super Mario into a class of 3rd, 4th graders, some portion of that class is not going to have ever been equipped with the tools to really be able to do that game. And the schools never tried to do anything to help them, right? It's not like reading, right? By 3rd or 4th grade, we expect you to be able to read the 1 or 2 sentences on your homework because we've trained you to read enough that we can give you homework that has 1 or 2 sentences on it. We've never, ever, ever done that with games. And so I think when we think about these curriculum, we may have to start thinking for the long term. And as much as I would love to drop it in all classes, we may have to stop thinking about dropping it in the middle of people's school career and instead think about those really simple, I don't know if any of you have younger siblings or relatives that have picked up an iPad when they're 2 and play the silly counting games or learning their ABCs, and games that are so simple and so intuitive, they can learn the basic things that they need to learn at that point in their life anyway, and pick up game literacy while doing so. So in some ways, it's not about the game adding to the learning experience at that point, it's about them learning game so we can use games in the future. And I think that's going to be one of the key hurdles to overcome as we start thinking about integrating games in the classroom. As far as the larger other questions, catch me after maybe if we have time, and I will give you a super long spiel.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Hey James, first off, quick plug for Undertale, kind of the same category as Spec Ops: The Line. It's really awesome. It's kind of another example of games as art. But then my actual question is, so there's virtual reality like the Oculus Rift. I think it's like Valve VR or something like that. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with the channel Node?
I don't know what the channel Node, no.
Okay. What they do is in a lot of cases they'll actually get a lot of early access stuff. In one of the cases, one of their members was actually working on a control VR system, so you could actually go pick up things and play with an Oculus Rift. But then you aren't just using a keyboard; you're actually walking around using this system strapped to your chest and these gloves. So I guess I was just kind of curious, what do you know? Have you seen anything about the VR systems and what your thoughts are on it?
So yeah, I don't know. I think we did an episode kind of recently. Has the episode about why I'm still skeptical on VR come out yet? Okay, good. So I write these and then it's a month and a half before they come out, and so I never actually know what I've written, what's in my head, and what's actually on the interwebs. Okay, so I will give you my short version then. I still have some doubts about VR for a number of reasons. I've seen it come and go 3 or 4 times during the course of my career, much like 3D film, right? And much like 3D film, it's sort of been a gimmick when we need a little boost in the industry. I would like to see it be successful because 1, it's awesome, and 2, there's a lot of studios who have bet very heavily. But it comes with a lot of problems, right? When your head and neck are operated in the virtual world by your head and neck, so physiologically exactly the same way that you would operate them in the real world, and yet your feet are operated with your thumbsticks or with a mouse, it is disjointed, right? It doesn't actually necessarily feel like full immersion. And so you notice the technology, and just like in 3D film, when you notice the technology, it breaks you out of the experience, right? So I think that's a problem we have to face. There's also the fact that right now, if you see any of the good VR demos, the best VR demos are pretty awesome, but they're built specifically for VR. And most of the major companies are not building games for VR right now. They're like, oh, you can totally play our next Call of Duty in your VR headset? Well, yeah, of course I can. But it's not actually that satisfying of an experience, and given the extra price tag, I don't know that consumers we've hyped it up to the point that I don't know if consumers are going to be satisfied with a non-VR specific experience. And nobody's going to start making VR specific experiences until we've sold a huge number of those headsets. But if you think about it, right, if I'm developing for the PS4, I have 60 million install base. It's going to be a long time till VR catches up to that install base, and it's never going to be 100%. So while there's arguably less competition, it also creates this market problem for VR. Additionally, VR is tough to market, right? VR does not convey the VR experience to watch a video of someone play a VR game. It does not convey the VR experience to see a screenshot of a VR game. And so we have another market hurdle to overcome. So I think there's a lot between VR becoming the next way we play games and where we're at right now. And I hope that we don't set back the technology because of how much we hyped it this time. It's quite possible that VR actually gets more applications in other fields and slowly becomes mainstream that way. Yeah. By the way, also Undertale is awesome.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, it's actually kind of funny that those are the things that were said before me, because so recently I had this week where I played through all of Spec Ops: The Line and then all of Undertale, like within a week.
Wow, what a side by side.
Yeah, it was a little weird, honestly, but so they do sort of similar things in that they're both sort of like deconstructions of a genre.
Right.
And they both do similar things in that they can make you feel like a terrible, terrible person. But one of the things that I found was that I felt like Undertale made me feel worse by pointing out that it was my choice, not to spoil anything. And so as how like you were talking about in the lecture, how video games give you the engagement to like make choices. Do you think that the way that video games can make you feel like you've made a bad decision or like you've become a bad person, is that like do you view that as like a good thing, a bad thing, or just an element of the media?
So it's a powerful thing, but like anything else, it's something we have to be very careful with how we use, right? Because on the other hand, we can set up an environment where you feel like you're making free choices and then make you feel bad about choices that, say, don't align with the purposes of the state, right? There's lots of, every modern mass media has in its early stages been used for some various forms of propaganda. And we're at that point with games, and we just have to, as designers, be very careful that we don't give into that temptation, but especially that we don't give into that temptation for our personal biases, right? It's very easy to assign what we believe as right and wrong to the choices within the game, rather than allowing you to explore the ramifications of those choices. And that's not necessarily bad. We just have to be very conscious when we're doing it and not just not do many of the things we do unconsciously, right? But does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to go slightly a little bit off from what you typically get.
All right.
I do a lot of online gaming, and a very interesting distinction between myself and my household and one of the other females that I game with is that if I'm in the middle of something with somebody online, my husband will wait. He'll sometimes wait as much as 4 minutes to get a goodnight kiss. However, the other person, her significant other, is view of it's just a game. There's no real people on the other side. I want something, I get it now. And it goes beyond just the basic, thing of, people being, inconsiderate, because I noticed that with some other gamers that I game with, in pickup groups, you'll occasionally hear the nasty girlfriend, quote unquote, or, the friend that's over who really shouldn't be. And I'm noticing that is a reoccurring theme. What are your thoughts on this?
To drill down a little bit more, what do you mean? Define the reoccurring theme for me.
The reoccurring theme is that people on the other side of a video game, as much as more and more video games are becoming more integrated in our society, and is actually a almost replacement for socialization for some people. How is society's current view on that going to shape that, and do you think it's something that should change?
So it's weird. It's a thing that I've wrestled with a lot because I always wonder if some of the massive wave of toxicity that we see in some of the larger online games today is in part due to the fact that 20 years ago, you had to be playing, if you were playing multiplayer, you were either playing around a table, playing a board game, or you were both sitting on the couch, right, playing the game in person. And that gave it a very clear human element, right? And you associated other players as human beings. And today, because so much of it has dropped to online only, it's very easy to abstract the person on the other side of the wire as not a person. And that's something that we're going to have to deal with as society because truth is more and more of our lives are happening online at this point, regardless of whether or not you're just looking at games. And so I don't know exactly how we're going to deal with it as a society. I have this feeling, especially from some of the things I've seen in the last couple of years and in DC, that we are slowly coming to accept as society that we need a social contract in the online space, right? That the online space is just not a lawless no man's land, that we're going to actually start having understanding what it means to be an online society. But the truth is, I don't think we're going to resolve any of these issues or truly resolve them until the last of us who grew up before we had a modem, right? Before there was a World Wide Web, until it's just generations of people who were born with this and understand and have come to some agreement on how important online is or isn't. Good? Right? So that's the best answer I have for you. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Great question, though. Thank you.
Hi, James. I'm still constantly amazed at how much you actually get done in a day.
I appreciate this.
That it terrifies you how much you get done with extra history and extra credits and all the other stuff you do.
It's really, I've never been able to sleep more than like 4 hours a night and need something to fill the time, so.
My question is, you mentioned in your lecture about how in perhaps as we got more advanced with our games and we started taking stuff from other media, we started losing some of the magic of games. Is there anything you think we can take from other media, maybe like specifically movies or even like tabletop games, if you want to stick in the game space, that you think will help with games?
So I probably was inelegant in how I phrased it. It's not that we shouldn't take things from other media, right? Because we are an agglomeration of a million other media, right? We use writing, we use sound, we use video and framing, but we shouldn't try to be other media, right? Okay. And that's the distinction that I actually wanted to put forward, because we've learned a lot. Games are better for all the cinematography stuff that we've taken from film, right? Rather than reinventing the wheel. There's all sorts of things about that we've taken in terms of music and scoring that that have improved games vastly, right? There is so much about the sort of techniques of writing that clearly delineate good games from bad games. It's just that I never want a game that, or we need to acknowledge that we are a separate media, right? That we use all these things, but we aren't. But we shouldn't try to be those other things to the exclusion of what is sort of at the core of games to me.
Okay. Thanks. I think that answers my question.
Thank you.
Hey. Hi. I'm George. I'm a psych grad student here. I have been thinking about this problem with games in education for a long time, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. It deals with games being an optional activity people do, and then once you bring them into the classroom, once you make them, part of a lecture or even sign them for homework, they no longer become optional. I think that might make it lose some of the magic. Just for as a quick example, my master's is on Minecraft and just testing to see if it has creativity effects, like compared against TVs and against racing games, and I saw it did have a good effect on creativity measures, except when you ask someone to play as creatively as they can. When you introduce that one line before they play, it kills any positive effect.
I would love to see your creativity metrics because one of the things I've been arguing a lot recently is that creativity is a teachable skill, right? That sure, just like anything else, you may have a natural aptitude, right? Some people may be math geniuses, and some people, no matter how much they train, may never quite get to that level, right? But we have accepted as a society that we can train everybody to the point where we can at least get them through algebra. That is sort of a supposition our society makes. And this involves accepting that we can get people to be better at math than they start out. And I think this is true of creativity as well, right? Creativity is something that you use, but we've always consigned it to the realm of either genius or not. And so I would love to see some of the creativity data. As far as opt-in, I think everything opt-in is more powerful, right? When I go and learn something on my own, rather than be forced to do it to get through an academic requirement, of course I'm going to be better at it, right? I'm going to do it better. I'm going to put more into it. There are a number of ways that we talk about to get people sort of to believe themselves to be opting in to activities that you actually need them to do. And we do this all the time in games, right? If you look carefully at games, you'll see all these places within games where we need you to do the tutorial, or we need you to go this direction, or whatever. And so we've been all these other subtle things that you feel like you're doing it on your own, and you're even excited about it, but really, we had to get you there. And so I think there's also a lot in terms of, I think it's a completely valid psychological study to, one, figure out how important the opt-in effect is, and two, to figure out what we can do to get people to sort of voluntarily play. I mean, for me, this is the silliest one, but I was in Norway working with some classes of high schoolers. I just asked the class, right? So we can read this textbook, or since we're hanging out today, we can play a video game. And everybody was like, let's play a video game, right? And I think they got to get to play a video game instead of do a textbook assignment. I didn't have a textbook, right? So there are answers to that. I do not have enough good answers. My answers are all designer answers, where we get you to do the thing that you secretly actually want to do anyway, but if we told you to do, it would be worse, without telling you to do it. So I hope that helps in some way. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for that one.
That's good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, kind of controversial topic here, but I was wondering what your thoughts were on DLC and early access.
Oh, sure. Here's the problem with the modern AAA industry. Games today, the big AAA games, games you're going to see on your PS4, your Xbox One, cost upwards of $50 million, very often upwards of $100 million. The existing traditional games market, right, which I don't mean this is, but literally when we talk about it, what's usually considered the traditional games market is young men 14 to 30. That is what we talk about. And that market is not big enough to support $100 million budgets anymore. That's why you've seen such a contraction in the industry. And so we need to find new ways to generate revenue. There are two ways to do this. Expand the people who play games, which is what I'd like to see, or find a way to charge people more for their games. DLC is the second answer, right? Where we have to recoup $80 per unit instead of $60 per unit, but we know we can only sell it at retail for $60 or people will complain. So we sell it for $60 and then a month later launch a $20 DLC pack, which we think at least 50% of our audience is going to buy. And so, I mean, that's why the DLC thing is what it is. I don't mind alternate methods of monetization, right? I'm actually super happy that DLC exists as an option because I enjoyed Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2, right? But I thought Dark Souls 2 had some great DLC. And I was 100% happy to get more of that experience, and I would gladly fork over money for yet more of that experience, right? And so I don't want us to just say, oh, DLC is always bad, because then all we're saying is we're never going to get more of these games we want to play. But at the same time, I think using it as a patch for the fact that we have priced ourselves out of our own market is unfortunate, and we really need to find another answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Last semester I started participating in a game design class as a artist. And I found I really enjoyed making 3D assets and things for games like that. And I want to go into the industry. What would from someone from inside the industry, what do you look for in portfolios and people, and like how would you recommend I make myself look more interesting to companies, even though I have a small portfolio at the moment?
What year are you in?
I am a junior.
Okay, so this one might take a while. Okay, so to start out with, the number one things we look for in almost any discipline is actually communication and collaboration. We need you to, these are team efforts, right? Nobody makes a game. Nobody, as an individual, Sid Meier's name may be on that box. Sid Meier does not make those games. It's a huge interdisciplinary team, and people need to work together. And so we would actually rather find somebody with less raw talent and more ability to work with the team. So that's number one, which I will trust that you've got just fine. Number two, I actually recommend you go to GDC, go to some of these conferences, meet people in person, because you're going to have, if you're mailing your work to jobs at whatever, it's a lot harder than if you can mail it to a person and say, hey, can you put this on the HR person's desk? Because they'll put it in a different file than all those things that just pile up in the jobs at box, right? So this is why the conferences are of high use. Don't feel like you have to spring for any of the expensive passes or anything. Just go to them, hang out, and meet people. Don't worry about attending our lectures or any of that. As far as your portfolio, a lot depends on the company, but just polish, right? I would rather see 6 really high-quality pieces than, and to know sort of where you cap out at, than giving me 40 or 50 pieces that only say, well, your work probably isn't of the level that we can really use, right? So you have unlimited time right now before submitting these things. Second, don't worry about submitting your resume and your portfolio whenever, because the worst that happens, they discard your portfolio and your resume, don't remember your name, and you do it again in 6 months. So just submit your resume everywhere, all the time, always. Sooner or later, you'll get it. Don't worry about, or if you're willing to, expand your horizons beyond just the traditional AAA games, because I know a lot of people when they talk to me say, oh, I want to get into games, what they mean is they want to build stuff for a console. If you're also including things like your tablet or phone games, things like that, that industry is like at least as large and has at least as many open jobs as the traditional video games industry. Your portfolio level, go look at go to your favorite games and go get to the credits and write down the name of the artists and look up their web pages, and they'll have their portfolios up. And because we all know we're all a year away from having to find a new job, because that's the game industry. And so look at their portfolios, right? And honestly sort of size yourself up, right? You don't have to be quite as good if you're looking for a junior position, but that's the target mark for you. And if you can, I don't know how much of a games industry there is around here, but very often people in your local industry would be happy to look at a local, there's all sorts of meetups that usually happen. I don't know if that's as applicable around here, but for people to look at your portfolio. And then get an internship, right? If you can this summer. Do you have an internship lined up for this summer?
Not yet.
So you still have time, right? Not a lot of it, but there's no reason not to try for getting an internship anywhere this summer, because that's actually the easiest way into the industry. Because it's very low cost for them to hire you for 3 months and decide you're not working out, and so it's much less risky for us than trying just to hire a junior employee. So get an internship, and there's a site, I was telling the game club earlier, but there's a site called Game Dev Map, which will has contact info for basically every game studio out there. It's a little out of date sometimes. It's not the best. A lot of it's jobs at contact info, but it's a startup. And so start there. And other than that, if you find any of the artists whose portfolios you really like, look them up on Twitter and just ask them, right? Like sometimes I mean, people like being acknowledged and people like being asked their opinion. And so reach out because we're not as inaccessible as we seem.
Okay.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys. So that's all the time that we have for the open air Q&A. However, James has stated that he will be happy to stick around and answer any of you guys' questions one-on-one. I actually wanted to address you guys. But that being said, also shameless plug for GDC. This weekend, we're having an event called a Pitch Jam, which is just come up with a game in 24 hours and flush it out and, pitch it to the club. It's a lot of fun, no pressure. You don't have to make the game. It's just come up, there's no problem with scope on this one. You can make as big of a game as you want. It's just a big fun activity. If any of you guys are interested in doing that, let us know. But other than that, have a great night, guys.
Thank you.
Hey guys, welcome back. If you would like to learn anything more about the industry or what it's like to actually be living the dream of making games, go ahead and click on any of the videos that are currently on the screen. They will all take you to an interview series that we conducted called Bi-Weekly Dev Talks, where we talk to developers, designers, and other really awesome, really important people in the industry to find out what it's actually like to be living the dream and how we might be able to break into it ourselves so that we can share a little piece of that pie. But thank you so much for watching. Go forth, make games, be awesome. See you guys.